Just give a quick overview of what we do at AgileTheDocs. AgileTheDocs is a software company, and I'm based in Warrington. I'm the only tech writer, and I write across 2 Scrum teams. So when I started at AgileTheDocs, there hadn't been a tech writer there before me for a while, and the devs had been doing a lot of the documentation. Everything was in Word, and there's a lot of legacy content, and they'd only just started going Agile. So there was lots of changes in play, and we needed to try and keep the documentation up with the Agile team. So I'm going to talk through how I approach my work, what tools and process changes I've brought in since I started, and what challenges I face and where that kind of brings me to now, which is what I'm gathering from you guys to get your input and try and take back with me and improve things further. So first of all, a quick overview of how I approach my work. The general cycle of writing content, review and rework is probably familiar to most people. What I try to do is, where I can, avoid context switching. And what I mean by that is, if for example there's a new feature being created, if I can write the release notes content for it at the same time as the user guide, or at least start thinking about it, then I will do. It's not always possible in practice, but where I can, it does help to save time and just keep up with the Agile process. What I have there in the diagram, the to-do, in progress, in review, and done, is how I try to map out my work in my head, and also in Jira, which is our backlog management tool. It's a little bit touching on some of the lean Kanban principles, but nothing really concrete, just a way of making sure I'm moving through the process of tasks. So the tools and process changes that we've brought in, I mentioned that when I started, everything was in Word. We now use Flare, which allows me to single source and have a more chunked approach to the content so that I can keep up with just writing for a specific feature rather than an entire guide in one go, that kind of thing. And it allows us to have an integrated help, which we didn't have before. It's also closely integrated with Perforce, which is our version control system. So that means that when I've created a new version of the help, I can publish it out into Perforce, and then it's picked up by the installer so that the guys can review it in its format as the integrated help and see it as it will be. And it's there almost instantly, so that helps with the review process, and also means that there's no handover between me and the DevOps guys. I can just publish it straight out to Perforce and it's picked up. So again, it just helps us to keep up and keep things rolling. Other tools that we use, which aren't specifically doc related, just across the company to improve communication, Slack is one change that we've had come into the company. And this helps me from my point of view. If I've got something to review, I can post it on Slack as well as setting up meetings or emails, whatever it might be. And this just means that anyone can see that the doc's there and take a look if they've got time to review. But it also means that I can see the conversations that the dev guys are having, and if there's things coming up that they've not mentioned to me, it's just one way for me to be able to notice it. Obviously, it can have the downside of lots of noise, lots of conversations going on. You can't always keep up with everything, but you can tag specific people. So if there is a doc-related task, they can make sure I'm aware of it, and it just increases the visibility of documentation, which I found has helped me to keep up with the Agile process. I mentioned Jira that I use to track my tasks, and I try to keep things in a sort of order of what I'm working on, what's being done, what's in review. Sort of like, I call it my Kanban board, so it's sort of like that lean approach. And that just helps, again, to raise the visibility of documentation, because Jira is a tool that the developers use as well. Where we are still separate is the guys have their own backlog and I have mine separate, so that's an area where I'm not sure if we may change things going forward, if we can become more integrated. But we are already having the guys tag me if there's doc tasks on their Jira tasks, so at least there is more integration than there was. And another planning tool that we use at AgileTheDocs is Real-Time Board. And again, it's just a case of bringing the visibility of documentation into all of these tools that the engineers are using. So where the Scrum team #1 would have a planning board across the top, and then the DevOps team, now we've also got the doc team on there as well, so that again we can link tasks so that what I'm working on, I can see what the guys are working on, and just help to keep that process going and help them to keep thinking about what effect their work will have on the docs. So the obvious challenges that I face are things that have been mentioned and touched on today. How to keep up with that development. We have 2-week sprints, but we only release every month. I say only, that's still quite an aggressive cycle for me to be able to keep up with, but it means that I don't have to have releasable docs at the end of every sprint, but I am expected to keep up with what the guys are working on. It's not part of the definition of done. We have a sort of loose agreement that I should be up to date with everything that's going on, but there's no official, it has to be done as part of the definition of done. I find that I work with the usability team a lot to be able to work off their designs rather than things that have been implemented. That's one way to get ahead. And in terms of sprint meetings, I don't attend all of the meetings because, as I said, I'm the only writer and I'm across 2 Scrum teams. It's just not possible to have all the time to do everything. But I do attend when I can if they think they're going to add value. If, for example, I don't attend a sprint planning meeting, which might last for 2 hours, I'll then go to the product owner and have a higher level overview with him later so that I can at least know what's coming up, but save that 2-hour time period to actually work on content. And the other major challenge that I faced, which I mentioned at the start, is when I took over, when I started, there hadn't been a tech writer and a lot of the content had been written by developers. And there's still a lot of legacy content out there that needs to be updated and brought back into the product. So that's a huge challenge for me, trying to balance my time between that and the new content that comes out of the sprints. In addition to that, we've had several rebrands in the last year. So every time that happens, obviously that's just another thing thrown in there. So really I just find the closer I can work with product management and product owners to keep things prioritised. So if there is legacy content that I haven't got time to implement, that just has to wait till a later period, get the new things in, and work with the usability team on their designs to make sure that I'm getting it as ahead as I can. And then it does mean that sometimes there's an element of rework, but at least then I'm closer up to date than I would have been had I waited until they'd implemented it in the software. So that kind of takes me to where we are now. We're definitely more agile in terms of writing content than we were when I started, but I came here today with a question in my mind, do we need to be part of the definition of done? So listening to a lot of talks has really helped me to see that there's no right or wrong on that. And I think just going forward, once we can get a handle on more of the legacy content, it will start to become easier to keep up with the agile process. So that's where we are today. Yeah, that's all I've got really. Thank you for listening. As you said,